I am John Murray, and I am from Ithaca, New York, upstate New York. It's a college town, Cornell University, Ithaca College. And what I wanted to do today, in order to share my DMM story, is maybe go a little bit outside the gates of that and give you some context as to the journey that I've been on. The way I'm going to do that is by using the DBS question number 1 of the 7, which is, what are you thankful for? And how and where has God been showing up in your life? And so I'm going to give you 12 places that he's showed up in my life. Try to move through them quickly. The first one was 49 years ago, 1974. I was on a trip backpacking in Montana right before my freshman year at Cornell University, and fell asleep at a wheel and ran head on into a tractor trailer in a CJ5 canvas top Jeep. Was thrown out the windshield, essentially left for dead, and woke up the next morning in a hospital in St. Cloud, and had a nurse walk up to me and say, "God saved your life." And to be honest with you, at that point in my life, I was not a believer in any way, shape, or form, and it was a wake-up call from my life. And so I would call that a divine collision. No, there's divine appointments. That was a divine collision for me. And then about 8 weeks later, I showed up on the campus at Cornell University. I had been recruited there to play football. Went to see this doctor. He told me I was should forget practicing or playing football, that I was actually going to either be in a wheelchair or have to have a plastic hip, because my hip had been dislocated for 3 hours and he said it was going to die. And so as I left that powwow, as you can imagine, I was actually walking, and I was going down what's called Library Slope at Cornell University. I had a guy who actually was doing what we want to do. He was listening to the Holy Spirit. He was the director of Campus Crusade for Christ. His name was Jack Sims. He was getting his car at the bottom of Library Slope. It's a long slope that goes up to one of the libraries at Cornell. And he felt like God wanted him to go ask this guy walking down the hill why he was wearing a cross. And he was actually seeing a 12-inch cross on my chest. My cross was about 1.5 inches, but he was compelled to walk up to talk to me. And he walked up, and I just had this negative conversation. I was struggling in my mind with, God, why did you save me to be, an invalid? And he basically started just talking to me, and he gave me a magazine. It was a sports magazine. It was called Athletes in Action. It was a magazine that Campus Crusade for Christ used to publish. Some of you may know that or be aware of that, but they had these athletes that would share their testimony. So I took the magazine home, read it that night, and for the first time in my life, understood the gospel message, understood that Jesus loved me, that he had a plan for my life, understood that there was a problem called sin that was separating me from God, and that Jesus had actually done something to remove that problem. But I never understood that there was a personal response I had to have. So that night, I was on my knees, and I began following Jesus in 1974. And so that was my divine appointment with a guy named Jack Sims. Number 3, try to keep on track here. I'm also thankful that in the spring of my sophomore year at Cornell, it would have been 1976, I showed up at a countercultural church called the Love Inn, INN. It was a part of the Jesus movement. Any of you who have seen Jesus Revolution? This was Jesus Revolution on the East Coast in a tiny town called Freeville, where hundreds of young people were gathering in a barn, and there were all these, musicians playing, and there were people that were not really like me. They were hippies, and I was an athlete. I was a jock, so, but at the same time, I was just, I loved what I saw. And so I began attending the Love Inn. As you can imagine, my parents were a little concerned about me at this point, because I'm going to the Love Inn, and they're like, "What is this thing? Your church is in a barn?" And number 4, the fourth thing, and this thing I'm actually super thankful for, is that at the Love Inn, as I was graduating 2 years later, 1978, I met a young lady who was super attractive. Her name was Kathy Ellis, and she is now Kathy Murray, who's a part of our group. And Kathy and I got married in 1981, 42 years ago. And so we were following together at that particular point in time. I'm also thankful, number 5, for the fact that God, he gave me the opportunity to be a head wrestling coach for Division III NCAA school called Ithaca College in Ithaca. I had absolutely no experience. I was hired for $3,500, a part-time job. 15 years later, we'd won 3 national championships. But I'm not so much thankful for winning championships, but for the opportunity he gave me to connect with young men. And I did that for 15 years. I mean, that was basically, they were my congregation. I mean, they were the people that God gave me to influence and have an impact on, and just have tremendous recollections from that. Number 6, I'm also thankful that while I was doing this part-time head wrestling coach gig, I was at a hospital, and I started, to help set up a fitness center. And I was the director of cardiac rehab and wellness. I'd had a master's degree in exercise science. And so I had patients coming to me asking me, how do I buy a treadmill? And I'm like, I don't know, I'll call. Back then, there was no place to buy them locally. And so anyways, I called a company, and the guy on the other end of the phone said, sounds like you know what you're talking about. Why don't you sell our treadmills? And to me, that moment was a divine moment. It was sort of an aha moment where all of a sudden I just thought, like, I think I'm supposed to do that. And so within a year, I started a company called Advantage Sport and Fitness, which is now probably the largest distributor of commercial fitness equipment in North America. We sell millions and millions of dollars up and down the East Coast, setting up fitness centers for commercial facilities. I have 2 daughters that are identical twins. We have 3 total, but 2 that are identical twins. They both work for me with Advantage, and they're sort of a part of that. And again, we have about 100 employees. And to me, that is the people that I have an opportunity to connect with all the time, every day, and be able to share my life, share the gospel. When we were together back in June, I had the opportunity to give them all 2 books. One of the books that I gave them is a new book by Mark Batterson called Please, Sorry, Thanks. And I didn't really know much about the book until I didn't even read it before I gave it to him. I just love his writings. I also gave him one called Chase the Lion. And what's amazing is how many of them were just so engaged in that. We were handing out wristlets that said Chase the Lion, and they were all saying, can I get more? So those are seeds that God gives me an opportunity to plant in terms of that. So that's sort of the up. And there's one final thing before we hit the DMM part of this, is that I'm thankful that God gave Kathy and I, and Kathy was key in seeing this. In fact, one day she came down, we were thinking about planning a church, and one day she came down and she said, hey, God told me we're pregnant. That church is coming in 9 months. So I'm like out there hunting for a place to do it. And God gave us the opportunity to have Catalyst Vineyard Church. Again, I was bivocational, and we labored at that. We planted that in 2015. And then 5 years later, the pandemic happened, and we switched it to online. And then eventually in November of 2021, it just felt like, you know what, that's not what God has for us going forward. And so we basically, I guess you could say, we left the building of the Legacy Church. We've continued to meet with a group from Catalyst as the Gen Zero group. It's probably about 10%. I think we average about 130 people. So it's probably about 10% of what we're averaging, or somewhere in that vicinity. So the DMM part of my story started with a gal by the name of Brittany Moore. She's the lead pastor of the Spindle City Vineyard in Albany, New York. And Brittany and I were talking one day about evangelism, and she asked me what I used. And I'm like, well, I give these sort of altar calls, and I'm baptizing people at a lake. And she's like, I use a Discovery Bible Study. And I'm like, what the heck is that? I'm like, I've been a Christian for a long time, and I've never heard of that. And so she connected me with a guy by the name of Jim Egley from the Urbana Vineyard, who's also a full-time employee at New Generations. Some of you may know him. And then he connected me with a guy named Roy Morin. And so I ended up, as the pandemic was proceeding, March to mid-May of 2020, I went through his Habits of a Multiplying Disciple. And then I joined the coaching cohort, sort of like what we're doing afterwards. And a guy named Chris Galanos came on, one of those coaching cohorts, and started talking about wig take and what's it going to take. And so I called Roy up and I said, hey, what's it going to take for me to get in a transfer to Chris Galanos's group? And so that's how I ended up here. Fortunately, Chris was okayed it, and Roy didn't take offense to the question. But I'm really thankful for Chris. I mean, I love the way he sits back and lets other people lead. You know, Jim and Brent and you know, and Susie and all the different people that are involved in leading this. But at the same time, I just see his giftings all over this, and I'm grateful for the fact that he sort of let us in. And then when I say us, eventually Brent did a training with a bunch of people from upstate New York. Kathy, my wife, was one of them, and then she started attending, and she went into Chris's father Gary's group. So she was in group one, and then Brent told us we needed to go through the eLife training. He said I should do it again. Kathy should do it. We did that with Tyler in January to February 2022. And then we began just becoming a part of this on a regular basis. And I wanted to say that I'm thankful for Brent. Brent did a lot to help me. I'm thankful for Susie and her leadership. Love it when she gets fired up and starts preaching a little bit. And for Jim and his encouragement to go out and to, I mean, Jim would be the first guy I would try to hire as a salesperson in this cohort, just so you know. He definitely has that ability to go out and take risks and connect with people. And then somebody else is Jim Thurber. Jim came here in August of 2022 to Ithaca and did a training with some people from our Gen Zero church and some people from Group 8. And his walk, talk, storytelling, it was amazing. Highly recommend it. He was here for like essentially Friday night through Sunday. And so I'm really grateful for you guys, because this is not I didn't go to the Dallas Theological School. You know, I was, like Brent was saying, I was coaching wrestlers and trapping people in saunas and letting them beg to try to get out. All those kind of things. Probably could be arrested for some of the things that I did when I was coaching. But anyways, so number 11, I'm also thankful for Group 8. We have an amazing group. You know, Kathy obviously is a part of that group. Jim Holt, who I know most of you know. Jim is from Potsdam, which the first time he came into this sort of discussion, he was in the discussion, and we broke into a 2-person deal, and I'm there with Jim. He's like, I'm like, where are you from? He's like, well, I'm from like a place you've never heard of. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I'm from upstate New York, like way up. And I'm like, where is way up? And he's like, Potsdam. I'm like, yeah, we did their fitness center. And so Jim became, and I said, you're in Group 8. That was back when I was in Brent's group. You're in Group 3. And then in another training, the eLife training, Adam Brago was, we did a breakout, and I was in a breakout with Adam, and I recruited him, said, you need to sign up, become part of our coaching thing, and join Group 3. And so Adam joined, and Matt Mariacher, I've known, he was a wrestler in college, and he and I were talking about Chris's book, and he eventually came in. So what I'm really grateful about related to the group is that we have a vision to see something happen in upstate New York. And, you know, upstate New York is not New York City. I was just in New York City last weekend. I mean, it's Albany, it's, you know, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, up to Potsdam, to Ithaca, down to Binghamton. You know, it's a part of the state where there's a large population that's very spread out. And I think God is beginning to do some things there. I really do. Our Gen Zero church is participating along with the Group 8 in every Tuesday night. We have a short session of coaching from 8 to 8:30, and then we pray for an hour together. And one of the really cool things, and I'll share the results on that with you, in a little bit. Number 12, this number 12, the last one of my 12. I am also thankful for this bridge that God is starting to build with this crazy young guy in Rochester, New York. And this crazy young guy, his name is Jack Worthington. And Jack is a guy that, as a student at RIT, only knowing the Lord for, I think, 2 years, began to apply the principles of DMM. He had never been in a real church. And all of a sudden, there were 11 groups on the campus at RIT, 11 churches meeting. And since then, my understanding from Jack is they have fourth generations that have happened. And they baptized 80 people, I think, in the last 2 years. And God is doing amazing things. And so we got connected with Jack, I think maybe through Matt and Ariaker. And so in 3 weeks, we're going to be with him for a second push weekend event called the Global Harvest Festival. I think Brent's doing this. And I just wanted to just real quick read what Jack sent out about this. I love this guy. I mean, if this guy was a wrestler, he would be the guy that would go out and just go after people like crazy. Anyways, the Harvest Festival will be a time of disciples and churches across upstate New York who desire simple multiplication until regional saturation, to sharpen one another as we cross-pollinate with mutual encouragement. Simple activities will be sharing the gospel and praying together in our neighborhoods, connecting with other practitioners across the region, communicating, encouraging stories, and on and on and on. Then he talks about the fact that there's 7 other cities. One of them's Portland, I believe, right, Brent? One of them's Portland. And then also cities in Africa, South America, and India are participating in this event. And he basically said the common threads that we want to have is that we're focused on movement via either DMM or CPM. We have a simple church model, and that the priesthood of believers. That's an important part of how we're going to approach it. So we're going to have people from Rochester, Syracuse, Watertown, Albany, and Lima, 5 cities that are in upstate New York, which is really, really cool. And so I want to sort of close up by telling you a few things that Chris told us is what you're supposed to talk to your people about. What's the top takeaway? My top takeaway from having done this now for over 3 years sort of relates to a quote by John Wimber, who many of you know was the guy that was sort of the catalyst of the Vineyard movement. It's that everybody gets to play. And to be honest with you, when we were doing Catalyst, Kathy and I could never figure that out. How do I get everybody to play? How do I get everybody? I don't have enough volunteer jobs to do this thing. And so to me, that's what DMM is. That's what making disciples is, that we're all called to make disciples, and that it's sort of the priesthood of all believers. And so to me, my top takeaway is this thing is a team sport. That's what's different about this. It's the team sport. Everybody gets to play, priesthood of all believers. And if you stay in the stands, it's got to be a decision you're making yourself, because everybody's called onto the field. The other thing is what's gone well. I think for us, I know Kathy and I focus on God's word, our Gen Zero church. We've done the Creation of Christ series over the last 6+ months. And she and I have been reading this 1-year chronological Bible, which basically you read through the entire Bible in a chronological sequence. And that's been awesome. So we've been doing that together. Our multiplying extraordinary prayer, I think has gone really well. Our 2023 goal for our group 8 was to have 230 hours of prayer. And we've already, 288, and we've already got 230 as of last night. So we're definitely being intentional about that. I think ongoing coaching, what's challenging us is going out among the lost, seeing groups start, casting vision to believers, training believers. I think we've been in and out of all those things. And we really, I look at this guy that's 5 years into following Jesus, and I'm 49 years, and he's already got 4th generation. I'm like, I want to go learn from what the heck is he doing, and just sort of hang out and, observe him. So that's our story.
Joe, help me thank John for sharing. John, that was great. Thank you for sharing your story, especially the backstory. That was awesome. Thank you for sharing all those amazing things that God did in and through you guys. So we have a few minutes here. So if you guys have any questions for John, feel free to post those in the chat. We'll ask him some questions. And John, I'll start by asking you, just obviously you're pastoring a legacy church. You decided to make this transition into DMM. What would you tell somebody else that is thinking about that, but they're just questioning it because they've never been a part of something like this before? It's kind of new to them, like it was new to all of us when it was first presented to us, and they're just they're hesitant. Well, what would you say to somebody that's familiar with DMM? Maybe they've heard about it, but they're hesitant to begin implementing it in a legacy context just because they just haven't been around something like that before. How would you encourage them?
I think, first of all, I'd probably say there is one difference that I might have with some people on the Zoom, in that I'm bivocational. And it's sort of what some of you have had to gain something. I've been doing that for a long time. And so maybe that made it a little easier to make the decision for Kathy and I. But I think once we started seeing this, we just felt like this was, of course I had Brent as a coach too. That's like probably gonna, I mean, I just felt like we need to take a risk and see what happens, and I think both in the case of Kathy and I, we felt like our future in following Jesus was to go all in. I've never been really good at not going all in. So I think probably that's why I ended up doing it.
That's great, John. Yeah. Let me ask you a question about that, because we haven't talked a lot about that on the call, but you've got an interesting experience in that you said the whole time you've been pastoring your church, you were bivocational. So you kind of started out bivocational. What have you seen, John, have been maybe some of the advantages of being bivocational? I think most people that have been bivocational are hoping to be fully vocational at some point and haven't stayed bivocational like you have, but you maybe named one of the advantages there, potentially recognizing that this transition could have been made a little bit easier by being bivocational, because you didn't have the concern about, salary from the church. But how has being bivocational overall, both in the legacy church days and even now, how have you seen that be helpful or an advantage in your ministry?
I think from listening to other people, being in some of the various groups and things like that, I think it's the fact that I'm used to being around. I mean, every day I'm around people that don't know Jesus. And so one of the struggles that I hear people talking about is, it's hard to get out and do a prayer walk. I mean, I got all the things to get done at the church, and it's almost like they're trapped inside the walls of the church. And so the blessing that I've had is that I've been hanging out with college wrestlers. I've been hanging out with salespeople in a company, and every day I'm in conversations with people at all different levels who don't know Jesus, who I look for opportunities to be able to share my faith with them or be able to talk with them about things. And that's, I think that's been a very good thing, the fact that I'm sort of already in the middle. I'm already in the middle of a market, may not be Pepsi in a sense, but definitely already in the middle of a marketplace.
And John, you were pastoring a sizable church. I mean, I think the average size church is maybe 75 in the US. It was over 75, and you were still able to be bivocational. Did you feel like that took you away from some things that you needed to be doing, or were you able to manage both of those commitments fairly easily just by having to recruit more volunteers or more people to help you do things you'd otherwise have to do if you were in the church office 8 hours a day?
Well, probably don't want to have my wife answer that one because, she's been dealing with this bivocational person since the beginning. I'm getting a college degree. I'm coaching. I'm running a hospital rehab program. I'm coaching. I started Vantage Sport and Fitness, and then eventually we're going to plant a church. And so Kathy has been amazing to put up with me. So I think that it was just, I feel like God has given me a talent to switch from one thing to the other, or to do both things at one time. And it's almost a personality thing that I have where, I can be doing two things at one time and it doesn't really bother me that much, where other people would really bother them. So I think part of it's a gifting to be able to do it. And I think God gave me a gift to gather people. There was a time just shortly after I met Jesus that I woke up one morning and I felt like God said that I've given you another name. Your name is Gatherer. You will gather people. And so then I gathered wrestlers, I gathered salespeople, but so I think it's a little bit of the gifting things.